The tension inside the glass-walled boardroom felt sharp enough to cut through steel. Executives in tailored suits whispered among themselves, their eyes drifting toward the woman they believed held the real power. Her posture was rigid, her chin lifted with the kind of entitlement carved from generations of unchecked privilege. A billionaire by inheritance, not effort. She carried herself like the world itself needed her permission to turn. Everyone noticed the moment the black woman entered. She moved quietly, her steps steady and composed, presence radiating the calm confidence of someone who had weathered storms far greater than the ones in this room. Yet the billionaire's eyes narrowed instantly, as if the very air had changed. Without a word spoken, her expression hardened. Her body turned slightly away, and her hand intentionally, visibly remained anchored at her side instead of rising to greet the newcomer. A subtle shift rippled through the room. A few exchanged awkward glances, others pretended not to notice, but all felt the sting of the silent dismissal. The billionaire believed she was making a point, a quiet declaration of superiority. She believed she already knew who mattered in this negotiation, and who wasn't worth acknowledging. What she didn't know, what no one in that room suspected, was that the woman she had just insulted wasn't there to seek approval, validation, or access. She was there to decide the fate of a $5 billion deal, and she held every single card. The real power in the room had just been ignored, and that mistake was about to change everything. The silence that followed the billionaire's dismissive gesture lingered in the air like an invisible weight. Yet the black woman didn't pause, flinch, or react. She simply moved to her designated seat with the same deliberate grace she carried everywhere. Her composure contrasted starkly with the billionaire's rigid arrogance, creating an unspoken tension that settled across the long, polished table. While others focused on projected numbers and upcoming presentations, she focused on observation. She watched how people shifted uncomfortably, how a few eyes flicked toward her and then away, unwilling to acknowledge the disrespect, but unwilling to challenge it either. She had seen it all before: rooms where elegance masked prejudice, where power dressed itself in silk, diamonds, and silent exclusion. She took in the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling city pulsing with ambition. Somewhere in that maze of glass towers, thousands of people worked tirelessly for opportunities she'd had to fight for twice as hard. Her thoughts drifted back to early days, long before billion-dollar decisions, before executive titles, before anything that resembled prestige. She remembered cramped apartments where she studied under flickering lights, balancing textbooks on her knees because the small kitchen table was already crowded with bills and unpaid notices. She remembered the weight of expectations placed on her shoulders. It's not because others believed in her potential, but because society demanded that she prove what others received by default. Every step she took in her career had been carved through resistance. She had risen through industries that favored those with last names linked to legacy, not labor. She had become a strategist, whose insight quietly reshaped corporations from the inside out. She had built relationships across continents, learned markets far beyond familiar borders, and earned a reputation for seeing opportunities where others saw risks. Her rise wasn't loud. It was measured, intentional, and resilient. Now she sat in a boardroom where her influence surpassed anyone's assumptions. Her team trusted her judgment. Investors respected her intellect. Entire divisions waited for her recommendations before making significant moves. Yet here, in this pristine room filled with polished egos, she watched how easily her presence was misread by those who judged power through the shallow lens of appearance and race. Across the table, the billionaire flipped through documents with practiced impatience. She didn't look at the woman she had refused to greet. Instead, she behaved as though the only significance in the room belonged to her own opinions. Her gestures were sharp, almost theatrical, as if she wanted the world to see that she viewed herself as untouchable. Her reputation for entitlement was well-known: stories of staff belittled in hallways, vendors dismissed for minor imperfections, and competitors mocked during social events circulated quietly among those who had worked with her. Yet people tolerated her because of the wealth she represented. But today was different. The deal at stake wasn't one she controlled, nor was it something her money alone could secure. She didn't know that the proposals she had arrived with were incomplete, rushed, and based on outdated assumptions. She didn't know that the black woman she had ignored held the updated evaluations, the market projections, and the international stakeholders' final preferences. Most importantly, she didn't know that the decision to move forward hinged entirely on her approval. The meeting host began reviewing reports, but the woman stayed silent for now. She let the introduction play out, watching the billionaire dominate the room with confidence built on misinformation. Others nodded along, not because they believed her, but because they feared contradicting someone who used her wealth like a weapon. As pages turned, charts displayed, and summaries delivered, the black woman's mind worked quietly in the background, connecting gaps, identifying faults, analyzing implications. She had spent months working with global teams on this project. She carried the weight of thousands of employee futures, community developments, environmental impacts, and long-term growth strategies. This wasn't just a deal. It was a transformation blueprint with the potential to rebuild industries. Meanwhile, the billionaire continued her performance, believing she owned the stage. She believed the black woman's calm silence signaled insignificance. She believed her refusal to shake hands was a powerful message of who belonged and who didn't. She didn't realize how deeply wrong she was. The setup of the day had been orchestrated long before anyone stepped into this room. Teams overseas aligned with one voice. Analysts prepared under her guidance. Leaders waited for her nod to proceed. Even the final signatory, the one whose approval could greenlight or kill the project, looked to her for direction. As the meeting shifted into deeper discussions, she placed her hands gently on the table, signaling her readiness. Those who knew her recognized the subtle change in posture. They straightened slightly, sensing something major was beginning. Internally, she steadied her breathing. Years of being underestimated had taught her to turn invisibility into strategy. She wasn't going to confront the insult. She didn't need to. The truth was already moving beneath the surface, unfolding with the quiet inevitability of a rising tide. The billionaire still believed she held authority, but the real balance of power was about to reveal itself, one calculated, deliberate moment at a time. The shift in the room's energy was subtle at first, so subtle the billionaire didn't notice it. But those who had worked with the black woman before recognized the moment her focus sharpened. It was the same poised stillness she carried into high-stakes negotiations. It's the same steady presence she brought to crisis rooms where markets trembled and leadership scrambled for direction. She wasn't confrontational by nature. She didn't need to be. Her strength came from clarity, from understanding what others overlooked. And from years of building expertise without applause, she watched the billionaire continue her self-pointed display of dominance, unaware that the foundation beneath her was already beginning to crack. The billionaire's voice carried through the room with certainty that wasn't earned. She pointed to outdated projections, misinterpreted trends, and glossy presentations crafted to impress but not inform. Her confidence came from money, not mastery. The black woman took quiet note of every flawed assumption. She recognized the careless shortcuts, the kind that happened when someone believed their wealth would automatically compensate for their lack of strategic depth. She saw how the billionaire's proposal underestimated key markets, overlooked cultural factors, and ignored crucial data about shifting global demand. None of it was surprising. Entitlement often bred a dangerous kind of blindness. Around the table, a few of the executives shifted uncomfortably. They had reviewed the woman's work before this meeting. They knew where the real value lay. Yet they remained silent, careful not to provoke the billionaire. Power, when perceived incorrectly, could make even seasoned leaders hesitant. As the presentations continued, the woman remained composed. She let the process unfold naturally, never rushing, never forcing the moment. She understood the weight of timing. In negotiations of this scale, influence wasn't about speaking first. It was about speaking. The moment truth could no longer be ignored, her mind wandered briefly to the communities that would be impacted by this deal. She had walked through neighborhoods where children studied by candlelight, where small businesses tried to survive despite lack of resources, where parents worked multiple jobs to keep dreams alive. She had visited remote villages where every job created by this investment could transform a family's future. She carried their hopes with her, not loudly, not publicly, but with a steady sense of responsibility. That responsibility grounded her now. The shift in the room's energy was subtle at first. So subtle, the billionaire didn't notice it. But those who had worked with the black woman before recognized the moment her focus sharpened. It was the same poised stillness she carried into high-stakes negotiations, the same steady presence she brought to crisis rooms, where markets trembled and leadership scrambled for direction. She wasn't confrontational by nature. She didn't need to be. Her strength came from clarity, from understanding what others overlooked, from years of building expertise without applause. She watched the billionaire continue her self-pointed display of dominance, unaware that the foundation beneath her was already beginning to crack. The billionaire's voice carried through the room with certainty that wasn't earned. She pointed to outdated projections, misinterpreted trends, and glossy presentations crafted to impress but not inform. Her confidence came from money, not mastery. The black woman took quiet note of every flawed assumption. She recognized the careless shortcuts of the kind. That happened when someone believed their wealth would automatically compensate for their lack of strategic depth. She saw how the billionaire's proposal underestimated key markets, overlooked cultural factors, and ignored crucial data about shifting global demand. None of it was surprising. Entitlement often bred a dangerous kind of blindness. Around the table, a few of the executives shifted uncomfortably. They had reviewed the woman's work before this meeting. They knew where the real value lay. Yet, they remained silent, careful not to provoke the billionaire. Power, when perceived incorrectly, could make even seasoned leaders hesitant. As the presentations continued, the woman remained composed. Let the process unfold naturally, never rushing, never forcing the moment. She understood the weight of timing. In negotiations of this scale, influence wasn't about speaking first. It was about speaking the moment. Truth could no longer be ignored. Her mind wandered briefly to the communities that would be impacted by this deal. She had walked through neighborhoods where children studied by candlelight, where small businesses tried to survive despite lack of resources, where parents worked multiple jobs to keep dreams alive. She had visited remote villages, where every job created by this investment could transform a family's future. She carried their hopes with her, not loudly, not publicly, but with a steady sense of responsibility. That responsibility grounded her now. The room felt suspended in a rare kind of silence, one that carried weight, clarity, and the unmistakable pull of shifting power. Even the soft hum of the ventilation seemed to fade as the black woman continued outlining the critical realities the project faced. Every point she revealed peeled away another layer of illusion the billionaire had wrapped herself in. And every insight she delivered pulled the room deeper under the gravity of her authority. Her explanations weren't rushed, were precise, measured, and rooted in undeniable truth. She detailed the long-term sustainability challenges, the overlooked demographic shifts, the underestimated cultural complexities, and the economic implications that demanded far more strategic nuance than the billionaire had ever considered. Her words didn't need volume. They carried impact through quiet certainty. Across the table, the billionaire remained frozen, her confidence dissolving piece by piece. She watched as leaders she once dismissed as insignificant leaned forward. With genuine interest, every gesture directed not toward her, but toward the woman she had ignored from the moment she entered the room. The billionaire's breathing tightened. For the first time, she wasn't steering the narrative. She wasn't being admired. She wasn't being sought for. Direction, she was being outclassed. The shift became even more visible when the woman presented her solution, a complete restructuring of the project, grounded in real-world data and supported by international partners who trusted her judgment. She spoke of sustainable investments, community-focused growth, and long-term innovation. The room absorbed every word with the attention reserved only for those who carried true expertise. The billionaire's mask of superiority began to crumble. Underneath, her features revealed something she had rarely felt in her life: relevance. The woman placed a final document on the table, a summary of recommendations crafted with strategic depth the entire project required. Executives exchanged glances of quiet relief, recognizing stability where moments earlier there had been chaos. Analysts nodded as the pieces finally aligned. Even the host adjusted his posture, acknowledging that the foundation of the entire negotiation rested on the insight she'd just delivered. Then came the moment that shifted the room from realization to revelation. One of the senior global representatives, a man known for steering billion-dollar international ventures, opened his folder. He held an envelope stamped with the insignia of the international board overseeing the project, without theatrics, without the drama. He placed it at the center of the table, directly in front of the woman. The billionaire's eyes widened. She recognized the seal. It was the final approval document, the one no one had yet received, the one that determined whose proposal would define the future of the entire deal. Her heart hammered in disbelief. She looked at the envelope, then at the woman, then at the envelope again, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. She waited for someone to move it toward her. She waited for someone to say her name. She waited for someone to explain the misunderstanding. But no explanation came, because there was no misunderstanding. The representative calmly rested his hands on the table, his attention fully on the woman. The rest of the room followed suit, their focus unified. The air felt charged, the kind of tension that erupts only when truth becomes impossible to hide. The billionaire reached for her pen, as if bracing herself for a chance to reclaim control. But the pen trembled in her hand. For the first time all day, she wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending. She was realizing. She had refused to greet the one person who held the most authority. The one person whose work upheld every pillar of the project. The one person responsible for deciding whether billions of dollars would be invested or withdrawn. The woman opened the envelope, steady, unbothered. Inside was the final authorization document signed by the board, naming her as the lead strategic evaluator and final decision-maker for the entire $5 billion deal. A wave of shock rolled across the table. Executives straightened. The host exhaled. Audibly, the billionaire's world tilted. The woman reviewed the document like it was a familiar page, as though she had expected this outcome, and she had. She knew the board trusted her. She knew the stakeholders relied on her accuracy. She knew this role wasn't a surprise or a gift, it was earned through skill, integrity, and years of relentless work. When she placed the document on the table for others to see, the truth became irrefutable. She wasn't just part of the negotiation. She was the negotiation. The billionaire's chest tightened as a crushing realization settled over her. Money had never been the true currency of this deal. Respect, insight, and integrity were. She possessed none of the three in this moment. The meeting resumed, but the dynamic had transformed completely. Every analysis now referenced the woman's recommendations. Every projected outcome relied on her judgment. Every action plan awaited her confirmation. The billionaire's presence, once dominating, now felt like a fading echo. Her attempts to recover her authority fell flat. Each gesture looked smaller. Each movement seemed unsure. Her certainty had collapsed under the weight of her own prejudice. The climax reached its apex when the representatives formally announced the next phase of the project. They revealed funding allocations, community programs, infrastructure redesigns, and corporate expansions, all aligned with the woman's strategic framework. And in that moment, the billionaire fully grasped the scale of her mistake. The hand she refused to shake belonged to the woman shaping the future. The woman she overlooked was the architect of everything she wanted to control. The person she deemed unimportant was the engine behind a multi-billion-dollar transformation. Her silent dismissal had not just been disrespectful, it had been self-destructive. The power she believed she possessed dissolved, replaced by a quiet, humiliating awareness. She wasn't the center of the room. She never had been, and now the entire world she operated in was shifting without her. The announcement settled over the room like a final, undeniable truth. The black woman, still composed and steady, continued reviewing the finalized strategy as if nothing unusual had happened. Her demeanor never changed, no triumph, no gloating, no reaction to the sudden wave of respect sweeping toward her. She remained anchored in the role she had earned long before anyone noticed her presence. Across the table, the billionaire felt the last remnants of her confidence slip away. Seconds earlier, she believed herself untouchable. Now she struggled to sit upright. Her thoughts collided chaotically, questions about influence, control, reputation, and perception, spiraling without direction. Every assumption she had walked in with had collapsed under the weight of reality. The room no longer catered to her. No one pretended to agree with her outdated ideas. No one leaned in her direction. No one nodded in reassurance. Those privileges evaporated the moment the truth emerged. Respect gravitated toward competence, not wealth. Toward integrity, not entitlement. Toward the woman she had refused to acknowledge. The representatives continued, outlining the implementation roadmap, praising the innovation woven throughout the updated projection. They highlighted community-focused initiatives, long-term sustainability plans, and employment programs embedded within the strategy. These elements were foreign concepts to the billionaire, but foundational to the woman who had spent years advocating for equitable growth. Executives who had once avoided eye contact with her now acknowledged her with subtle nods, grateful for the clarity she had brought. Analysts scribbled notes furiously, eager to align with her decisions. The host referred back to her documents repeatedly, treating them as the backbone of every next step. Even the senior international representative maintained a respectful posture toward her, as though recognizing her presence carried the weight of multiple nations' confidence. The billionaire felt invisible in a room she once believed revolved around her. She lowered her gaze to the table, unable to escape the replay of her mistake. She recalled the moment the woman entered the poised walk, the calm confidence, the quiet grace. She remembered turning her body away, refusing to extend a hand, assuming superiority without reason. She remembered the pride she felt in that moment, imagining she had sent a message of authority. Now she saw it differently. She had exposed her own ignorance. She had insulted the most powerful person in the room without ever realizing it. And there was no undoing that first impression. Meanwhile, the woman remained focused on the next stages of work. Her mind was on the communities the project would uplift, the infrastructure it would strengthen, and the long-term opportunities it would create. She thought of the students who would one day benefit from scholarship funds tied to the development. She envisioned small businesses thriving under new economic frameworks. She pictured families finding stability, all because a project was designed with care rather than greed. Her purpose had never been to prove herself to the billionaire. It had never been about recognition or dominance. It was about impact, real, measurable, transformative impact. And with the board's trust, she was able to guide the project towards something meaningful. As the meeting neared its end, the atmosphere began to settle. Papers were gathered, folders were closed, chairs shifted. Yet the room remained unusually quiet, as if everyone sensed they had witnessed a moment that would be remembered. The billionaire lingered, slower to move than anyone else. She felt the walls close in, not because she lacked wealth, but because she lacked the very quality that had carried the woman to this point: respect, earned through character. The woman stood calmly, organizing her documents. Her posture remained steady, her expression unchanged. She didn't look toward the billionaire for validation, acknowledgement, or apology. She didn't need any of those things. She had learned long ago that the world would misjudge her before it ever understood her. She had stopped chasing approval the moment she realized her work spoke louder than prejudice ever could. Executives approached her with gratitude. Leaders thanked her with sincerity. Partners left reassured. Each gesture reflected the influence she carried, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it effortlessly. The billionaire watched, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to understand how she had misread the entire situation so profoundly. She felt something she had resisted her entire life: humility. A quiet, painful humility that came not from being defeated, but from being confronted with someone whose presence illuminated every flaw in her assumptions. As the woman stepped out of the boardroom, she paused briefly near the doorway, not to look back, but to internalize the weight of the moment. She understood the significance of what had just unfolded, not as a personal victory, but as a lesson etched into the fabric of the environment surrounding her. In a world where prejudice could still hide behind expensive suits and polished smiles, truth had revealed itself in the most undeniable way. She walked down the corridor with the same calm grace she entered with, carrying the power of quiet resilience. She didn't need recognition, applause, or validation. Her work, her integrity, and her impact were enough. Behind her, the billionaire remained seated, staring at the documents she once believed she controlled. For the first time, she recognized that true power didn't come from wealth, status, or legacy. It came from competence, character, and the courage to build something bigger than oneself. The billionaire's hand, once withheld with pride, now rested uselessly on the table. A silent reminder of a mistake that would follow her far longer than she expected. The woman she refused to shake hands with had been the architect of a $5 billion deal. And the question lingered in the air long after she left the building. What would the world look like if people recognized greatness before prejudice blinded them to it?